Welcome to Real Clear Politics on Sirius XM for Friday, January 17th. I'm Andrew Walworth. I'm joined today by RCP co-founder and president Tom Bevan and Washington Bureau Chief Carl Cannon. Well, gentlemen, we are counting down the days until inauguration. It will be moved inside because of expected frigid conditions in the nation's capital. Carl, the new nation will deliver his inaugural address at noon Monday. What will you be looking for?
Well, first of all, I'm glad it's indoors, Andy. I covered Ronald Reagan's second inauguration, and we were like nearly frozen to death before they moved it inside. We didn't even find out. We were out in the street, didn't even find out for a while. I was a young reporter then, and so the bottom, interviewing like parade people and kids in the parade and stuff, and I think somebody's some high school kid's trumpet froze to the lips, and they realized they had to move the inaugural ceremonies inside. The iconic one, of course, is John F. Kennedy. A bright, sunny day in Washington, snow, cold. This New England guy, he doesn't even have a hat on. He gets up there and gives that great speech. It's better when they're outside. The atmospherics are better. But I've been stalling. You asked me what I'm expecting, and that's it. There's two answers to that. One, what do I hope? And then what do I expect? What I hope is that Donald Trump would give an actual inaugural address, which he didn't do the first time. He gave a lengthy, dark campaign speech that George W. Bush gave one of the most pithy critiques of any film critic or any kind of critic. Hillary Clinton walks by on the podium and he said, "That was some weird shit." Well, I hope he doesn't do that. But we're in this weird political time. Joe Biden gave a farewell address the other day. That wasn't really a farewell address. It was also a campaign speech. And I don't know what he thinks he's running for. So I'll be looking to see if Donald Trump can give a speech that at least goes through the motions of trying to unite people, unite Americans.
Well, Tom, he did say in an interview recently that he was going to give a uniting speech. So should he? Is it time that he changed his tone and becomes this kind of kinder, gentler vision of himself?
Sure. I think he would be well advised to parlay his popular vote victory and his winning of all these, pretty significant electoral college mandate, 312 electoral votes in this day and age, into something more than what he did last time. Remember American Carnage? There was a lot of like, I'm going to fix this. I'm the guy. And so I think he'd be better served to start talking about we as the people and restoring America and all that. But listen, people thought that we were going to get the kinder, gentler Donald Trump after his near-death experience in Butler, Pennsylvania, when he gave a speech at the RNC, and that lasted for about 11 minutes. And then he did 44 minutes, sort of standard stump speech, fire and brimstone. So I don't know what his plans are, but I do think he would be well advised to really try and, provide an uplifting, forward-looking message about, where he's going to, what he hopes to achieve over the next 4 years, what he hopes to do for the country, that we're all in this together, instead of, what he did last time, which was, as Carl said, pretty dark and pretty singular, and in some ways sort of backward looking.
Yeah. You know what I'm going to be watching for? I want to see if he stays on script or on teleprompter because, you reminded me, Tom, and we were all there at the Republican convention in Milwaukee last summer where he came out to make this speech. And again, like you were saying, it was like, people expected sort of this new, improved, or kinder and gentler Donald Trump. And it did. It lasted about 7 or 8 minutes. And then but you sort of got the feeling that he read the room, thought he was losing his audience a little bit, and then just went like, full-on old-fashioned Trump. And I'm just wondering whether he'll do that. And now that he's inside, Carl, will he have the discipline to keep it short? Because when he's inside at these, he's used to talking for 3 hours. So,
Andy, it's the first thing I thought of. I thought, oh no, because if he's outside, he's cold.
Right.
then he's not going to go on like Fidel Castro. I often mention Fidel Castro length speeches, but Castro lived in Cuba. It was okay. The weather there is always nice. But the other part to what you said, Andy, I hadn't thought of this, but now that you mention it, the other hazard is that he's going to be inside, and it's going to seem less formal. It's not going to this big inaugural address where you're facing the mall. He might start riffing like he did at the Al Smith dinner or something, because he's going to be indoors. He'll want the crowd with him, but the crowd, if there was one thing I would tell the president if I was on his staff before he walked out to the lectern on Inauguration Day is, that's not the audience, Mr. President. That's not the audience. The audience is the 50 million Americans at home who are watching on television. That's the audience.
Yeah, I'm a broken record on this, and I'm with you. I always think that politicians, the good ones, understand that. And if you watch, a Clinton or an Obama, they somehow are able to play to both the room and the audience at home. And other politicians just don't understand that the real audience is out there at the other side of that television camera.
Well, the best guy who understood that was Reagan.
Well, yeah.
He'd grown up in television.
Yeah.
Trump's a television guy too, though. But Andy, to your point, I mean, I was on the floor of the RNC, and I was watching the teleprompter, looking at Trump and watching to see. And there was a very specific moment. He sort of gave this very intimate beginning and recitation of what happened in Butler. But there was a moment where he just simply stopped and stopped reading what was written for him, because he felt like he had lost the room. And for Trump, it's all about that visceral reaction and connection to the audience in, the live audience, if you will. And it didn't come across that same way on TV, but he certainly felt like he had lost the room, and so he went in a different direction.
Tom, it's an interesting cast of mind that you think, I'm losing the room. I need to bring Hannibal Lecter into this conversation.
We'll see. We should have a drinking game, and it's noon. It's a little early, but day drinking is sometimes.
He would not mention Hannibal Lecter in an inaugural address, would he, Andy?
Well, I don't know. I don't know if I'm going to put that on my bingo card.
They're eating the cats. They're eating the dogs.
Hey, Tom, what do you make of the guest list? I mean, both the people who are coming and the people who aren't. There'll be a lot of tech oligarchs there. That's our new term for them, I guess, or not all of our term, but that's the term of the day. And there'll be some people who won't be there, including Michelle Obama and Nancy Pelosi.
Well, I mean, I don't know that I'm surprised by the last two, but look, we talked about this yesterday, and this is a different environment, a different atmosphere for Trump. I mean, when he came in 2017 for inauguration, there were protests, and there was, protesting in the street. There was the entire sort of left wing sort of lost their minds. And it was this idea that he didn't deserve to be president. He was not legitimate, and they were going to resist. That was it. The resistance formed immediately. Completely different this time. And so there aren't the protests. There isn't the resistance. And by the way, Trump has won over a bunch of folks who were either against him last time or weren't for him necessarily, but now have expressed either, verbally or through financial commitments to his inaugural or, whatever, support for him. And I think that's what makes this really fascinating, and why it is such an opportunity for him this time around to take a different path than he did in 2017. It's a completely different environment. And if he recognizes that and he gives the proper speech with the proper tone, I mean, it could really help him in the first couple of months of his administration.
Andy, I don't know why Pelosi isn't going. But I think Michelle Obama should be there. And, she gave a very tough speech at the Chicago convention, the Democratic convention, and about Donald Trump and why voting for him was a bad idea. And she tried to rally people, and she did some events. She campaigned hard for Kamala Harris, and she was apparently bitterly disappointed that Kamala Harris lost. But to me, she should be there. She was a very popular first lady. I thought she was a great first lady. I liked her. And to her friends or critics or some of the left-wing people in our profession who would say, oh, how can she do that? Is that hypocritical? No, it's not hypocritical. She have an easy answer for that. She could say, I'm a hopeful person, I'm an optimistic person, and I hope Donald Trump proves me wrong. And she's the former first lady. I kind of think she should be there.
Would skipping the inaugural be, would you characterize that as going low, Carl? Is that
for those of our listeners or viewers who don't know that reference?
Oh, our audience knows that reference. Please, come on. If you're listening to this show, you know it.
I don't know if it's going low, but it is not going high.
Well, Carl, I want to get your take on one more thing, which is that the entertainment for the inaugural, they've been announced. Here are some of the performers: Carrie Underwood, Lee Greenwood, Christopher Macchio, who's the classical singer who has been in a lot of Trump rallies, Jason Aldean, and the Village People. And I'm just wondering what you make culturally of the idea that the Village People have emerged as the sort of band for Donald Trump.
Well,
they're kind of the Fleetwood Mac of Donald Trump.
I know. I guess it's because of the Trump dance, right, Tom?
It is.
But here's the thing: nobody knows who. There's a whole generation that doesn't know who they are. I mean, my guess is he's resurrected their career, and they're selling albums. They could probably go on tour. They may owe a lot to Donald Trump. And the other people, Republicans in this day and age don't seem to get the A-listers that Democrats get, but that's a pretty good group of singers, heavy on country music. I don't even know if Donald Trump likes country music. I do. My guess is J.D. Vance does, but a better list than you might have expected. But I agree with you. The Village People is the SAT question that doesn't match.
Where are the rappers? I thought Donald Trump was popular with the rappers.
They've announced that they're going to have some surprise guests. Okay. So and there may be one or two surprise guests that would surprise us.
Lee Greenwood, Trump is wearing him out. I mean, he's at every rally singing that song.
I know.
He never gets a break, that poor guy.
But that's pretty good bookend, because that song, released in 1984, and it's in Reagan embraced it. So we've come full circle, and I guess the Reagan Republicans, the Reaganites who sort of look askance at Donald Trump, at least he gave him Lee Greenwood. They've got something to hang their hat on.
Lee Greenwood signed the rights to that song, the publishing rights to that song, over to the Republican Party. So you have to, as much as Lee Greenwood, this has been good for Lee Greenwood's career. Lee Greenwood has been very good to the Republican Party. So
put his money where his mouth was.
That's right. Hey, you're listening to Real Clear Politics on Sirius XM. I'm Andrew Walworth. I'm here with Tom and Carl. Don't go away. We'll be right back after this. Welcome back to Real Clear Politics on Sirius XM. I'm Andrew Walworth. I'm here with Carl and Tom. And Tom, there was an interesting piece by Heather McDonald in the City Journal. It was on our front page today, Friday. And the question she asked was, can Trump make America safe again? It's sort of this call to get federal law enforcement agencies back to their original mission. Do you think she has a point?
I do. I mean, I think crime was an issue in this election. It may not have ranked as high as inflation or the economy or immigration, but there's certainly there was concern about crime in the cities and the suburbs, and I think that was one of Trump. That's his brand, sort of law and order. And you saw some of this backlash that took place with the proposition that passed in California, overwhelmingly reinstituting that. You remember they had raised the laws on shoplifting to like $900 or just under $1,000. So I think even in a blue state like California, people were fed up with crime and going to the CVS or the Walmart and having everything locked up and seeing some of these smash and grab things. I mean, we had that in Chicago down on the Magnificent Mile, where it happens way too regularly, where people just walk in and grab whatever they want and run out. There never seems to be any consequences for it. In fact, during the George Floyd episode, the leader of the Chicago BLM famously said that it was like reparations, and that all these companies had insurance anyway, so what was the big deal? That mentality, I think that that mindset and mentality has now met sort of the pendulum is now swinging the other way. It is met with backlash, and I think crime is an important issue to a lot of folks. And I do expect that you'll see, more law and order from the Trump administration, but also in a lot of these localities.
Yeah. Well, Carl, the Department of Justice released their final nationwide crime statistics for the Biden administration's term. They claim that following an uptick in violent crime in 2021 during the pandemic, crime actually has been trending down significantly. And in 2023, it included double-digit drops in homicide rates across many major cities, according to the Department of Justice. So is Tom right that, crime is a big problem, we got to solve it, or the Department of Justice right in that crime is actually coming down?
Well, I pay taxes as much as I'd like to agree with my government and criticize Tom. Tom's right. It was a big issue. There's certain things about the Justice Department report. First of all, the crime statistics are not as accurate or as clean as we'd like them to be. There are the FBI Unified Crime Report, which chronicles all these crimes, but many of the biggest jurisdictions in the country don't report their crimes, like Los Angeles, to the FBI the way they used to. And then there's the National Victimization Survey, which is also run by the Department of
aren't these statistics whatever? But they may be higher or low, but aren't when you look at the trend would be the same. I mean, they don't change.
No. The two. My point is the two databases are at odds. The National Victimization Survey shows crime going up, violent crime in almost all categories, and the FBI uniform goes down. So we've had some pieces by people who looked at this. It's just not an easy thing to know. But here's what we do know. A lot of crimes no longer even reported. My guess is that the crime is much worse than the Justice Department statistics show, because in some of these, for the reasons Tom mentioned, a lot of these property crimes, nobody even bothers to report them to the police anymore because there won't be an arrest. And the clearance rates are lower than they used to be. So even if you have a crime that's reported, investigated, there's less likely to be an arrest. The bond policies in some of these Democratic states, they keep releasing offenders, and so there's recidivism. So it's not, voters have a perception that crime's going up. You got to trust that. I think they're probably right. But the other issue that relates to immigration, and it came up Friday in a hearing, Kristi Noem's hearing, a confirmation hearing, as Homeland Security, the head of the Homeland Security Agency, is that migrant crime is an issue. And we're told, migrant crime's down. John Lott, some other people have written for us about that. Those are based on old studies of sort of legal immigrants, that legal immigrants commit crime at a less high rate than native-born Americans. But we don't have any kind of data on these 3 or 4 or 5, 7 million people who've come here. There are these famous crimes like the Lake and Riley crime, some famous crimes, but that's anecdotal. But we don't have the information. And what Heather McDonald's writing about is it's time to get the right information, and for the federal government to get a handle on what's going on and help states, because what we're talking about now is street crime. It's a local and state issue. Most of it's not federal. But if the federal government is approving, visas for hundreds of thousands of unvetted people, most of them men, most of them males, in crime committing age cohorts of any race or generation, you got, the states and localities need help from the federal government. That's what she's writing about. And if Kristi Noem, and she vowed to help do this, and this came up in her hearing, migrant crime, and she said we're gonna help the states cut it, reduce it.
Well, Tom, this Heather McDonald piece, she goes on at some length about DEI and that being sort of a real problem for these federal agencies, and sort of saying that they've taken their eye off the main ball in order to sort of serve all these other sort of policy agendas. What do you make of that part of her argument?
Look, I think she has a point, and I think that's another area where the pendulum is swinging back in the other direction. It was sort of, the whole DEI movement was pushed very aggressively, very quickly into every aspect of, corporate, educational, everything. And with, might have been the best intentions, but nevertheless, a lot of unintended consequences, some of them, many of them negative, you could argue. And so I think we've gotten back now to, if you look at Tom Homan, for example, who's going to be in charge of, Carl mentioned the sort of, mass deportation program, and he's starting with criminals. And there's like 1 million criminals that are here illegally, or illegals that are here that have committed crimes in this country. And those are the people that they're going to start with. And he's taken a very sort of aggressive and no nonsense tone when he's done a lot of interviews with, I would say, hostile media, organizations and TV hosts and the like. And he's just like, look, we're doing this, and you can either get with the program or get out of the way. And if you try and get in the way, there's a law for that, and we'll charge you for breaking that law. So I just think there's a whole, and I get the sense that again, you go down on the local level, you got a lot of these cities are run by Democrats, but nevertheless, I do think there will be a move back to just more enforcement of the law, less focus on all the extraneous stuff, including the DEI stuff, because that's what people are just fed up with, the crime, and they want it to stop. And it doesn't matter what your gender is, what your race is, just and this goes back to sort of the LA fire departments. Just do your jobs, what you're hired for. Don't, none of this other stuff matters. Can you do the job that you've been hired to do, whether it's putting out fires or putting criminals behind bars?
Well, speaking of LA, Tom is in LA today. I wasn't positive we were going to get Tom on the show today, but I'm glad he's here because I'm going to call a little bit of an audible. We do have some news today from on that CNN trial, Tom, that we talked about earlier this week. This is the libel trial down in Florida. Jury came back with the decision. What's the outcome?
So the jury awarded Zachary Young, the defendant who was, or I should say he was the plaintiff. He was the plaintiff. Sorry, he was suing for defamation. They awarded him $4 million and another of lost salary and another $1 million. So he's got $5 million. But they also, I think, probably as importantly, they said that CNN could be liable for punitive damages. So they're going to go to like another phase and deliberate over what those punitive damages might be. And as Carl knows, that's where you can get these crazy sort of judgments by juries in the hundreds of millions of dollars range. So
even if it's only 9 or 10 million, they'll break the record set the recent George Stephanopoulos ABC settlement.
Well,
that was a settlement. This is an award, though.
Maybe they should have settled for that before they went to trial. But nevertheless, look, this has been a disaster for CNN on a whole host of levels. And as we talked about before, there's like no real contrition, no apologies, no nothing, and which makes it look even worse. The fact that they've now been found guilty of this, and so.
Tom always roots for the plaintiffs in these cases. I always root for the news organizations. I'm loyal to our craft and the First Amendment.
You shouldn't be loyal to this CNN journalist who.
Well, when Alex Marquardt was asked on the stand, he's the CNN reporter who libeled this young guy who was getting people out of Afghanistan. When he's asked if he apologized, I'm not going to apologize. I've won 2 Emmys. That made it hard for me to stick with my pro-defense stance, Tom, but
but even more so, I mean, he was out to get this guy, and he said so in writing. I mean, that's not journalism.
He said, "I'm going to nail this guy to the wall."
Yeah,
I think that it was something like that. I don't want to misquote, but it was that idea.
That's not journalism.
I think, it was just the bravado of the newsroom, Tom. It's, things get out of hand sometimes, and sometimes we say things that macho we don't really mean.
Well, I don't know.
We say stuff like that in our newsroom?
No, we don't. But
okay, thank you.
That's because I'm in charge of the ethics.
We certainly don't write them in emails. Hey, you're listening to Real Clear Politics on Sirius XM. I'm Andrew Walworth. I'm here with Carl and Tom. We're going to take a quick break, and we'll be right back after this. Welcome back to Real Clear Politics on Sirius XM. I'm Andrew Walworth, and I'm here with Carl Cannon and Tom Bevan. And guys, I want to talk about this interesting piece that we ran on the front page of RCP today on Friday. It was from Politico. It's by Thomas P.M. Barnett. And the headline is, "An expert in grand strategy thinks Trump is onto something." And it asks the question, do you want a future in which Canada defects to the EU, Russia rules the Arctic, and China runs Latin America? That's the default outcome of non-action. And Carl, it raises this question of how America First sort of has morphed from isolationism, or at least that's what everyone described it as, to what is really now this aggressive foreign policy stance.
Yeah, we're going to rebuild the British Empire, although we never had the British Empire. So we're going to take over countries. We're going to rename the Gulf of Mexico Gulf of America. We're going to defenestrate Canada's prime minister, and we're going to buy Greenland. Nothing wrong with that.
Little annexation never hurt anybody.
Yeah. I was in Canada this week, and the Canadians do not want to be annexed. But what they're really worried about and what they're talking about is Trump's threat to immediately levy a 25% tariff against them. I personally I'm not a lawyer. I'm certainly not an international trade lawyer. I don't even think that's legal. We have a treaty with Canada. It was a treaty negotiated by Donald Trump, the son of NAFTA, where he wanted more favorable terms in the United States. And Mexico seems to be circumventing the spirit of it by importing cars from China and then sending to us. And Trump's mad about that. But I don't know what Canada's done to anybody. When the Trump administration complains about it, they say various things. But one of them, the couple of trade ministers from Canada went down to Mar-a-Lago and met with Howard Lutnick and and I think Doug Burgum too. And what they brought up was fentanyl, which I don't know what Canada's government's supposed to do about that, and the trade imbalance. The trade imbalance is interesting because if you take, I don't want to go down a rabbit hole.
Yeah, let's not. I don't want to get down on the micro.
Yeah, I'm sorry about that. But the thing is,
so Carl gave a speech in Toronto yesterday, and we haven't spoken to him since. And he was going to open his speech with a joke about Canada being the 51st state. How did that go over, Carl? Was that a good icebreaker?
I chickened out, Tom.
But Tom, here's the thing, and Carl sort of alludes to this, is that Trump makes these statements. The immediate reaction is, this is part of Trump's negotiating strategy. He's maximalist at the beginning. He says he wants to take over Greenland, but he really doesn't. He wants X, Y, and Z. But this Barnett piece, and I commend it to people because it's so thought-provoking, really says, no, that he's right, that we are in a moment of time where empire building is exactly what's called for. And that what Trump is doing by sort of extending the American lake, remember all those kinds of talk from Teddy Roosevelt days, is just what the world needs right now.
Well, listen, I mean, the initial reaction to what Trump says is, oh my God, he's insane. He's crazy. And then you kind of think about it for a little bit, right? After all the media hyperventilates, you're like, well, maybe it's not that crazy after all. Maybe there's some seeds of truth to it that makes some sense. Now, I suspect there are those who they always think that Trump is, playing 4D chess and he's ahead of the game in terms of these moves he's making. And then there's a crowd that thinks that, stuff just comes out of his mouth. And
they think he's Chauncey Gardner.
Yeah. With not a grand strategy behind it, right? Like, oh, it'd be kind of cool to buy Greenland. I suspect it's somewhere in between. I mean, I think Trump likes being provocative that way. In some ways, he's being kind of cheeky, right? When he's talking about, annexing Canada, making them a 51st state. But other aspects of it, I mean, he's dead right and dead serious about the Panama Canal, for example, and the Chinese sort of taking over a critical piece of infrastructure that allows our military to operate And, Greenland's another, I suspect he sees that as like a nice big parcel in upper Manhattan that he would love to have, right? It's his development days. Like, look at all that real estate that we could get. And, I'm the guy who could get it for us. So I suspect it's a little bit of all of those. I don't know that there's any grand strategy, but to your point, Andy, the Politico piece does sort of make you think about things the way China has invested over the last, 10, 20 years. It's been decades, and their plan moving ahead, pouring money into all of these countries, infrastructure projects in Africa and Latin America and South America, right? They're not doing that out of the goodness of their heart. They have a very deliberate strategy of global expansion, and we shouldn't just be sitting on the sidelines watching them do that. We should be doing some of that, for ourselves as well. And I think that's part of what Trump has maybe awakened people to.
Yeah. Well, Carl, Barnett makes this point. He says that this is a possible Nixon to China moment for Trump, and that Trump would be the guy who, even though he runs as American firster, ends up sort of changing the map. I'm just read you a little quote from the article. He writes, "Successful grand strategy is all about flowing with history's tides instead of swimming against them. That's how you expand your ranks. The evolution of the world system thus requires a very strong empire building phase." That's kind of bold thinking.
Well, it's also provocative. I mean, it cuts against, the conventional wisdom, and that's how you get some attention. And I agree with you, it's provocative thinking, but it got me to thinking, America first, that's the old Lindbergh phrase. But what Trump's favorite phrase, he's used that, but what he really says is make America great again. That's a more jingoistic thing. That's more Teddy Roosevelt. You mentioned that does imply that, making America great, maybe that means, again, taking back the Panama Canal. So, and he's talked about this, Trump has, what you said. So buying Greenland is an odd thing in the 21st century. You don't own a country. It's not like buying Alaska, but I guess it is like buying Alaska. So what would Greenland be? A part of be like Puerto Rico? Would be a commonwealth? Is that going to be a state in the United States? It has no particular affinity for the United States, but its people are, Denmark doesn't seem to know what to do with it.
Well, 90% of the people there. Just so we know, it's a very small population with 56,000 people.
Right.
Most of those people are Inuit. They aren't Danish. I mean, it's a really interesting question culturally about how Danish is Greenland. But go ahead.
And Trump could buy the country. He could buy every person off. He's got enough money to do it. But it's an intriguing idea because of presumed natural resources there. I mean, that's what you're talking about.
Well, also Chinese expansion in the Arctic. I mean, they are doing things up there,
right,
and pursuing deep sea mining and the like. I mean, this doesn't get reported on a lot, but it would be good for us to have some more presence there.
Yeah. Well, Tom,
I like with two Teddy Roosevelts here. It's kind of.
I think grand strategy is kind of an interesting topic. I think that's an interesting way of thinking about the world. I think, Tom, and I love your view on this. The dichotomy here is that, the Trump critique of the previous regime is that they were neocons, that they were trying to spread democracy everywhere, and they were sort of enamored of free trade. Those were, though, the ideas that sort of motivated or excused, if you will, American imperialism, if you want to take it from that point of view. We don't have those same sort of ideas for Trump. I mean, it is just really naked expansionism and American interests. And I'm just wondering how that might play out in today's global environment.
And what's wrong with that? I mean, what's wrong with naked American interests? All these other countries are pursuing their interests. I mean, that is the difference, right? I mean, the Bush administration and the neocons of that era thought that spreading democracy was an inherently good thing and that it would somehow redound to our benefit, right? But it didn't. I mean, and we tried to force democracy into these other countries that, culturally wasn't. I mean, we just, not every country can be turned into a democracy, and certainly not in a span of 3 to 5 or 7 or 10 years. And so we spent all of this blood and treasure trying to do that. It actually ended up being counter to our national interests in terms of what we spent and what we actually achieved. There was no return on investment, and so Trump is very much a dollars and cents kind of guy, and I don't think there's anything wrong with, again, China has been pursuing its naked interests. I mean, not in ways that are illegal, right? Stealing, intellectual property from us and all this stuff, and like just ignoring the sort of all of the sort of legal conventions around. Okay. So, all right, nothing wrong with it.
Well, look, let's just remember though, there's
30 seconds here, Carl.
I only need 20. There's a principle involved here, and it was explained by George W. Bush this way: freedom is not America's gift to the world; it's God's gift to every man and woman in the world. And that the point of neocon is kind of a loaded term, but the point of American foreign policy, when you value human rights and democracy, is to give people all over the world the chances we have to be free.
Well, on that note, we're going to have to leave it. I wish we could continue this. We can't. You're listening to Real Clear Politics on Sirius XM.
It's another show.
Yeah, we'll talk about it more next week. Anyway, don't go away, though, because when we come back, I'm going to talk to Eric Spitz about the Bidens. So we'll be back after this. Welcome back to Real Clear Politics on Sirius XM. I'm Andrew Walworth, and I'm talking now to RCP contributor Eric Spitz. We turn to Eric from time to time for insight into many things, including what is going on in Biden world. So, Eric, welcome to the program.
Thank you. Nice to be here.
So you have this piece that ran in RCP on the front page. Here's some of what you wrote. You say, in the annals of history, Biden's tenure will be likely framed as the bologna in the Trump sandwich, wedged between the two tumultuous terms of Donald Trump. Ultimately, Joe Biden will be remembered as a president who promised a bridge but left a chasm. His presidency stands as a cautionary tale about the perils of clinging to power, the importance of succession planning, and the need for visionary leadership in times of crisis. So in your view, is that really his most glaring mistake, that he didn't plan for succession?
I think he made it his most glaring mistake by declaring that he wanted to be a bridge to the next generation. A lot of people read that as he's only going to serve for 4 years. I don't think he said that, but it sure seemed to a lot of people that you might want to consider if that were a possibility. And it didn't seem like he did.
Mm-hmm. And you say that Kamala Harris, I don't want to put words in your mouth, but it seems to me from reading your article, which it's on Real Clear Politics, I commend it to people, that she was a bad pick for vice president. But why?
She was a bad pick for the vice president of someone who was likely only to serve a 1-year term, or one term in office, in the sense that she wasn't battle tested. She wasn't ready. He was, if anything, somebody who you might put in if you thought you had 8 years to really groom, and then you would groom them. And I think that he didn't do a lot of that, in the same way that the relationship that he had with Barack Obama was always painted as one of these brotherly relationships. That's not what we ever heard from the Kamala Harris-Joe Biden marriage, shall we speak.
Yeah. So do you think the problem was that she was too far to the left of the party, or that she was just not a good enough politician, or, as you know, some of her defendants say, that the nation just wasn't ready for a black woman to be in the highest office in the land?
I think there's a number of reasons that you could point to. I think this is a little bit of navel gazing. I think she wasn't ready by any stretch of the imagination relative to the other choices that he could have made if he decided that what he wanted was somebody who could take over after 4 years.
Yeah. So, when you look back at sort of what happened, after the debate to the election itself, that period was, and is Biden still sort of delusional about what happened? He seems to, he's in all his exit interviews, he keeps saying that he thought he could have won. He thinks Kamala could have won. He doesn't say how, but is he just, does he really believe that he could have won that election?
I don't think so. But I understand how, just like we all talk about how big the fish was that got away, it's easy for him to fall into the wanting it to be true camp. And that's what I think is going on. Is that delusional? If so, I think we're all a bit delusional about things that we're involved in.
Yeah, I guess you're right. It is sort of human nature. He's been giving these exit interviews and speaking out. He was on MSNBC. This might be his final television interview. Seems likely, with Lawrence O'Donnell. And he said, I spent too much time on policy and not enough time on the politics, because it just seems, I know it sounds so stupid to say, but almost in bad taste. What do you make of that? Do you think that he spent too much time on policy and didn't politic enough? I mean, this is a guy who's been in politics for 52 years. It's hard to think that he wasn't thinking about politics every day of his life.
I think that that's an admission that he picked the wrong partner and the wrong successor, because Kamala Harris is not a good retail politician.
Mm,
I've met her a number of times. That would be something I would not give her great marks for. She is more of a policy person. So I think Biden did the policy that he should have done. I don't think he did enough. And frankly, I think it was on account of his no longer having his fastball and having to rely on a bunch of junk pitches in his own politicking. And then he didn't have a partner that he could go dance with.
yeah. So play a little alternative history with us here. If How do you think it should have gone, and how could it have come out differently?
I think he had three different opportunities to choose someone, or to choose the ability for the Democratic Party and their voters to choose someone else. And he swung and missed three times. He could have chosen somebody who was ready on day one. He could have chosen to not run again in 24. And he could have chosen, when he anointed Kamala after he pulled out, to run an abbreviated new version of some contest where the
Mm,
winner, after a Aaron Spelling drama, is, I mean, why couldn't he have done The Voice and
right.
just run it in 30 days, and we could have had, the American people could have seen what it is. That's how we choose people now. Why couldn't we have done it that way? It was a golden opportunity. So I say that he had three opportunities to change history, and instead he made the same choice over and over again.
Yeah. You're listening to Real Clear Politics on Sirius XM. I'm Andrew Walworth. I'm here with Eric Spitz. We're talking about the Biden legacy, choices made, unmade. Um, you know, uh, the long knives are already sort of coming out. There was an article in the Washington Post where Jill Biden complained about Nancy Pelosi. You have a piece that came out today in the Wall Street Journal with Kamala Harris reportedly mad at Joe for saying that he could have won the election. So you have these factions. And I'd add, you have these former Obama people to that mix. They're all squabbling over who gets the blame for the 2024 election, and also who gets the ball going forward. So what do you make of the state of play right now with these factions within the Democratic Party?
It's a good question. I think the answer is you got to separate the two questions. Who gets the blame and who gets to lead are two separate things. I think that who gets the blame, there's no one who deserves the blame more than the guy in charge. The buck stops there. It was Joe Biden's fault. Full stop. Who gets to take over? I think, again, I would vote for the emergent process that we have in our country that lets people emerge. and come out of nowhere. And whether it's a Gavin Newsom or a Gretchen Wilmer or a Pete Buttigieg or a Gina Raimondo, there's lots of talent. And that's what was so frustrating to me about the mistake that Biden made. Because frankly, I think you know this, I've known Joe Biden since I was 17 years old.
Right.
And I grew up with his kids, Hunter and Beau. And I know from going to or being a part of a fundraiser where it was the Friends of Beau, we raised a bunch of money for the Kamala Harris Joe Biden campaign. And then we got to spend time with Joe where the first words out of his mouth were, "This should be Beau. This is Beau's spot."
Wow.
And throughout that, and throughout my life and knowing the Bidens, he's always been great with the next generation. And I give him supremely high marks for selecting his cabinet and operating his cabinet. They were all impressive people. Every single person in the cabinet was doing a great job as far as I could tell. And you didn't have any of the squabbling. Why didn't he extend that to selecting the next replacement?
Yeah, interesting. Hey, so you mentioned Hunter Biden. People know he got his pardon. He was there in the Oval Office for his father's goodbye speech on Wednesday night. Do you think we've heard the last from Hunter Biden, or do you think he's back in some way?
It's a good question. I would be surprised if he came back in some way. I think that he, from what I can tell from afar, he's a changed guy. I do know that he is not reaching back out to all of his old pals, which would be what I would expect if you were trying to reclaim what you once had. I think he thinks of himself as an addict who every day his job is to get through the day. As you know, I've had experience with that in my family, and that's just what it turns into.
Yeah. Well, Eric, hey, thanks for being with us. Always great to get your perspective. You're listening to Real Clear Politics. I've been talking to RCP contributor Eric Spitz. You can read his latest piece on the Biden legacy at RealClearPolitics.com. That's our show for today. I'm Andrew Walworth. Thank you for joining us. We'll be back here on Monday. It's inaugural day in the nation's capital. Hope to see you then, and have a great weekend.